The air on Halcyon Spire always tasted like recycled copper and the dusty regret of 1,000 failed dreams. It was a flavor Reed Harlow had grown accustomed to over the last 6 years, a grim seasoning to a life that had effectively ended a decade ago. Reed adjusted the seal on his respirator mask, his gloved fingers tracing the familiar scratches on the polycarbonate visor. Around him, the bowels of the refinery station groaned. It was a low subsonic thrum that vibrated through the soles of his magnetic boots, a constant reminder that the station, much like Reed himself, was holding itself together with rust and stubbornness. He was deep in Sector 9, a tangled intestine of pipes and conduits that the Helios Frontier Dynamics Corporation had long ago decided was not worth the cost of automated maintenance. That was where Reed came in. He was cheaper than a new servo droid and far more expendable. "Patch," Reed grunted, his voice distorted by the mask's modulator. "Light. Azimuth 30. A hover drone the size of a dinner plate drifted over his left shoulder. It was a cobbled-together mess of salvage sporting 3 different colors of plating and a lens that whirred noisily as it focused. Patch chirped a sound like a bird choking on a ball, bearing and cast a cone of harsh white light onto the corroded valve Reed was wrestling with. "Hold it steady," Reed muttered, applying torque to the hydrospanner. The bolt shrieked in protest, a metal-on-metal scream that echoed down the empty corridor. Reed Harlow was a ghost. To the payroll database of Helios, he was unit number 749, a generic maintenance contractor named Jonas Vane. To the few other workers he avoided, in the mess hall, he was just the silent old man who smelled of ozone and algae. But under the grease-stained jumpsuit and the heavy layers of synthetic armor he still wore out of habit, he was the former gunnery sergeant of the 304th Orbital Siege Battalion. He was the butcher of Silver Dunes. Or so the history books claimed. The bolt finally gave way with a snap. A hiss of pressurized steam vented out, instantly freezing into crystals as it hit the cooler air of the corridor. Reed ignored it, his eyes scanning the pressure gauge. It read 80% capacity, good enough for government work, or in this case, corporate neglect. He wiped his hands on a rag that was arguably dirtier than the pipe. "All right, Patch, let us pack it up. Shift is over in 30 minutes. He did not want to be out here. Every minute spent in the open was a minute exposed. He preferred the solitude of his unauthorized quarters, a converted storage hollow tucked behind the main intake fans. There he had his encrypted data slate. There he had the logs. For 6 years, Reed had been collecting them. Anonymous bursts of data-fragmented combat logs, sensor readings from the day Silver Dunes burned. Someone else knew the truth. Someone else knew that the order to ceasefire had been sent. Someone else knew that the Helios targeting arrays had overridden his manual lockout. But knowing the truth and proving it were 2 different galaxies, and Reed was stranded in the wrong one. He was securing the spanner to his belt when the station's internal address system crackled. It was usually reserved for shift changes or corporate propaganda, reminding workers that productivity was the highest form of loyalty. This time, however, it was a siren. It was not the rhythmic pulse of a hull breach, nor the wavering cry of a radiation leak. It was a sharp, staccato blast. Fire. Reed stiffened. He checked his wrist comp. "Location," he demanded. The display flickered green. "Sector 12. Waste processing and reclamation. Uninhabited." "Sector 12 has been sealed for 5 years, Reed said to the drone. "There is no oxygen flow. Nothing to burn." Patch beeped an inquisitive rising tone. Reed narrowed his eyes behind the mask. A fire in a vacuum-sealed trash sector was impossible, unless someone had breached the seals. And if someone had breached the seals, it was not an accident. He should go back to his den. He should keep his head down. That was the rule of survival. Do not look, do not ask, do not engage. Then he felt it, a tremor in the deck plates. It was faint, masked by the station's rotation, but Reed knew that vibration. He had felt it through the hull of dropships and the floorboards of bunkers. It was not an explosion. It was the rhythmic, heavy thump of impact drivers, plasma turrets. "That is not a fire," Reed growled. He grabbed his heavy pry bar from the tool cart, weighing it in his hand. It was a solid bar of hardened steel intended for leveraging blast doors, but in the hands of a veteran, it was a bludgeon. "Patch silent running mode. Follow me." He began to run. Despite his age, despite the ache in his knees that flared up whenever the humidity rose, Reed moved with a terrifying efficiency. He did not sprint. He flowed. He utilized the low gravity of the outer ring to extend his strides, pulling himself along handrails, sliding under low-hanging conduits. As he neared Sector 12, the air grew hotter. The smell of copper faded, replaced by the acrid stench of melting polymer and ozone. The emergency bulkheads were open. That was wrong. In a fire, they should have slammed shut automatically. He reached the threshold of the waste processing deck. The lighting here had failed, leaving the cavernous space illuminated only by the flickering orange glow of flames licking up the walls of refuse. The heat was a physical weight. Reed crouched behind a stack of crushed shipping containers, his breath loud in his own ears. He peered around the edge. The corridor ahead was a kill zone. 2 automated sentry turrets, the kind Helios used to suppress worker riots, were deployed from the ceiling. Their targeting lasers swept the smoke-filled hallway in erratic hunting patterns. The barrels glowed, cherry red. They had been firing extensively. And there was something moving down there. At the far end of the corridor, pinned behind a heap of slag, a shadow darted. It was small, too small for a worker, too fast for a droid. Reed zoomed in with his mask's optics. His breath hitched. It was a child, but not a human child. She was perhaps 10 years old by human standards, wearing a tattered, oversized cloak that was smoldering at the edges. Beneath the hood, Reed saw a flash of terrified gold eyes and large triangular ears, pressed flat against a skull covered in short russet fur. A tail thick and bushy flicked nervously behind her, the tip glowing with a faint, natural luminescence that mimicked the fire around her. A vulpine, a foxgirl, here on a human station in the heart of Helios territory. "Target acquired," a synthesized voice boomed from the ceiling. The turret swiveled. The laser dot painted the center of the slag pile where the girl was hiding. The girl panicked. It was a primal, terrified reaction. Instead of digging in, she broke cover. She scrambled over the debris, trying to reach an open maintenance hatch 5 meters away. "No!" Reed whispered. The turret's capacitor whined as it charged. A ball of superheated plasma coalesced at the muzzle. Reed did not think. He did not weigh the pros and cons of exposing his identity. He did not calculate the odds of survival. The logic center of his brain, the part that had kept him alive for 10 years of hiding, shut down. The soldier took over. He launched himself from behind the shipping crate. He hit the ground, sliding his ceramic-plated boots, sparking against the metal deck. He moved faster than a man his age had any right to move, fueled by a surge of adrenaline that felt like lightning in his veins. The turret fired. Reed threw himself into the path of the bolt. He hit the girl at full speed, tackling her just as the plasma discharge struck. He curled his body around hers, turning his back to the heat. Boom! The impact was like being kicked by a mule. The plasma bolt slammed into the backplate of his heavy maintenance armor. The ceramic shattered, absorbing the thermal shock, but the kinetic force drove the air from his lungs. He skidded across the floor, clutching the small alien body to his chest, grinding to a halt against a bulkhead. The heat alarm in his suit screamed crimson warnings. His back felt like it was being pressed against a furnace door. Reed gasped, tasting blood. He looked down. The foxgirl was trembling violently, her eyes squeezed shut. She was clutching a small, crude doll made of wire and scrap metal. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with incomprehension. "Stay down," Reed wheezed. He rolled over, forcing himself to one knee, raising the pry bar as if to throw it at the ceiling. The turret was tracking them again, the servo motors whining as it corrected its aim. "Get away from her!" The scream did not come from the child. It came from the smoke. From the darkness of the ventilation shaft, the girl had been running toward a figure emerged. It was a woman, no a vulpine female. She was tall, lithe, and terrifying. Her fur was the color of moonlight, on snow silver and sharp, but it was matted with blood and soot. She wore a combat harness that looked stolen and repurposed. She was hurt. Badly. Reed could see a jagged shrapnel wound on her thigh and burns across her left arm. But she stood with a feral grace, her teeth bared in a snarl that promised murder. In her hand, a ball of blue flame ignited. It was not technology. It was Kitsunebi bioluminescent energy projection. The foxfire swirled hot and angry, illuminating her desperate face. She locked eyes with Reed. She saw a human. She saw a bulky, armored figure looming over her child. She saw an enemy. She drew her arm back to throw the fire. Reed could not move. His back was seized in a spasm of pain. He stared at the blue death coming for him and thought, "At least I tried." "Mama, don't attack!" The high-pitched voice cut through the roar of the fire and the whine of the turrets. The fox girl scrambled out from under Reed's arm. Instead of running to her mother, she threw herself in front of Reed, spreading her small arms wide. "No!" The girl screamed again, tears streaking the soot on her furry cheeks. "The human veteran shielded me from fire." The silver fox woman froze. The blue flame in her hand flickered, casting wild shadows. Her eyes darted from the child to Reed, then back to the child. The cognitive dissonance was visible on her face. A human saving a vulpine. It broke every rule of the war that had ravaged their galaxy. "He shielded you." The mother's voice was rasping, layered with smoke and disbelief. "Target reacquired," the turret announced, indifferent to the drama. Reed snapped back to reality. "We can discuss my morality later," he shouted, his voice rough. "Unless you want to be Ash, we need to move Patch." The drone zipped out from behind the crates, where it had been cowering. "Pattern Delta, blind them!" Patch surged upward, emitting a strobe light frequency designed to overload optical sensors. The drone spun wildly, firing flares of magnesium and chaff. The turrets shrieked in confusion, their targeting logic overwhelmed by the sudden chaotic input. They began to fire blindly into the ceiling and walls. "Go!" Reed roared. He grabbed the girl by the back of her tunic gently but firmly and shoved her toward the vent. "Move!" He turned to the mother. She was swaying, the loss of blood catching up to her. Reed grabbed her uninjured arm. She hissed her claws, digging into his reinforced sleeve. But she did not strike him. "I have you," Reed grunted, taking her weight. "Into the pipe, now." They scrambled into the maintenance shaft, just as a stray plasma bolt incinerated the spot where they had been standing. Reed slammed the manual release for the hatch, spinning the wheel until the locking clamps engaged with a heavy thud. Darkness swallowed them, save for the dim red glow of the emergency lighting strip on Reed's chest and the fading blue embers in the mother's hand. The silence of the tunnel was heavy, broken only by their ragged breathing. "Move," Reed whispered, pushing them forward. "They will override the lock in 2 minutes. I know a dead zone." He led them through the labyrinth of the station. He knew these pipes better than he knew the lines on his own palms. He took them through a coolant overflow channel that had been dry for 20 years, then down a gravity well ladder that bypassed the security checkpoints. As they moved, Reed's mind raced. He had seen something back there. In the flicker of the fire just before the turret fired, he had seen the fuel sources. There were barrels stacked against the wall of the sector. They were not standard waste containers. They were high-grade accelerants, military fuel, and the serial numbers had been chemically scrubbed off. But on one barrel, the solvent had not done its job completely. A partial logo remained, A golden sunburst. Helios. The corporation was not just ignoring the fire. They had set it. They were burning Sector 12 on purpose. Why? To clear space. To hide evidence or to kill stowaways. Reed pushed the thought aside. Survival first. Analysis later. He guided them to his sanctuary. It was a hollowed-out section of a structural support beam, massive enough to house a small transport, which Reed had converted into a living space. It was hidden behind a false panel in a localized gravity dampener. He keyed the code. The panel slid open. "Get in," he ordered. The mother stumbled inside, dragging her leg. The girl followed, clutching her wire doll. Patch buzzed in last, hovering nervously by the ceiling. Reed sealed the door. The sounds of the station, the alarms. The turrets vanished, replaced by the hum of his unauthorized air scrubbers. The room was sparse. A cot, a workbench covered in disassembled circuit boards, a hydroponic tank growing edible algae, and a wall of monitors displaying passive feeds from around the station. The foxwoman collapsed against the workbench, sliding down to the floor. She let out a low, pained whimper. Reed pulled off his helmet. The air here was clean-filtered. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his graying, sweat-drenched hair. He looked at his guests. Now that they were out of the fire, the tension in the room shifted. It sharpened. The mother Arya, though Reed did not know her name yet, forced herself to sit up. Her eyes were glazed with pain, but the hostility in them was undimmed. She pulled the girl, Mira, tight against her chest, her claws extending with a metallic snout. "Who are you?" Arya demanded. Her common was accented, guttural, but precise. "Why does a trash hauler move like a shock trooper?" Reed ignored the question. He turned to his medical locker. "You are bleeding all over my floor, and that burn on your arm needs synthetic skin, or it will infect." "Do not touch us," Arya snarled. "Mama, he saved me," the girl, Mira, whispered. She was looking at Reed with wide, unblinking eyes. "The bad gun was going to shoot. He jumped." "Humans do nothing without a price," Arya hissed, her gaze never leaving Reed. "He wants something. A bounty." "We are fugitives." Reed grabbed a sterile pack and a bioscanner. He approached them, slowly, hands visible. "I do not want your bounty. I want you to stop bleeding so you do not die in my workshop. Dead bodies are hard to explain." He knelt, keeping a respectful distance. "Let me see the leg." Arya hesitated. She looked at her daughter, then at the blood pooling beneath her. She knew she was fading. Reluctantly, she lowered her guard just an inch. Reed moved to apply the bioscanner. As he leaned forward, the movement pulled his jumpsuit tight across his chest. The fabric was scorched and torn from the plasma impact, revealing the layer underneath. He was wearing an old thermal undersuit. It was a faded olive-drab standard military issue from the war era. Arya's eyes narrowed. She leaned forward, sniffing the air. Then her gaze locked onto his upper arm, where the jumpsuit sleeve had been burned away completely. There, on the exposed skin of his bicep, was a tattoo. It was faded by time and scarred by burns, but the ink was still black. A stylized skull, wreathed in orbital rings, superimposed over a shattered planet. Below it were the numbers 304th OSB. The air in the room froze. Arya's pupils dilated until her eyes were black pools of hate. The gratitude, the confusion, the hesitation, it all vanished, incinerated by a recognition so profound. It looked like physical agony. She knew that symbol. Every Vulpine knew that symbol. It was the mark of the battalion that had rained orbital fire down on the Silver Dunes colony. It was the mark of the monsters who had turned a sanctuary city into glass. With a scream of pure rage, Arya lunged. She ignored her broken leg. She ignored the pain. She moved with the speed of a striking viper. Her hand, wreathed in reignited foxfire, slammed Reed against the metal wall. Her other hand claws, extended like razors, pressed against his jugular. "Mama!" Mira shrieked. Reed did not fight back. He let his head hit the bulkhead with a hollow thud. He looked down at the claws trembling against his throat, then up into the face of the woman who wanted to tear him apart. "Butcher!" Arya spat the word. It sounded like a curse. Human butcher. Reed looked at her, his expression tired. Infinitely tired. He did not deny it. He did not beg. He simply looked at the daughter huddled on the floor, then back to the mother. "If you are going to do it," Reed said softly, his voice devoid of fear, "make it quick. The girl should not have to watch." Arya's hand shook. The heat from her foxfire singed the hair on his cheek. The smell of burning ozone filled the small room, again choking out the clean air. Mira scrambled up, grabbing her mother's arm, pulling with all her small strength. "Mama, stop! He saved me! He is the shield!" "He is a murderer! Mira!" Arya cried, tears finally spilling over. "Look at his arm! He is one of them! He burned grandfather! He burned the dunes! He saved me today!" Mira screamed back. The words hung in the air. Past and present collided in the cramped, silent room. Reed closed his eyes. He waited for the strike. He waited for the justice he had been running from for 10 years. But the strike did not come. Slowly, agonizingly, Arya lowered her hand. The foxfire extinguished, leaving only the smell of smoke. She slumped back, her energy spent sliding down the wall until she hit the floor. She covered her face with her hands and wept, a sound of deep, crushing grief. Reed stood there for a moment, touching his throat where the claws had pricked the skin. He looked at the tattoo on his arm. It felt heavy, like lead injected under the skin. He turned to the medical kit, picked up a pain suppressant injector, and set it on the floor within Arya's reach. "Clean the wound," Reed said, his voice raspy. He walked to the other side of the room, turning his back to them, to stare at the monitors. On the screen, Sector 12 was fully engulfed in flames. "We are stuck here until the patrol shifts change. 4 hours, then you leave." "And if we kill you while you sleep?" Arya whispered, her voice muffled by her hands. Reed picked up a soldering iron and began to work on a circuit board, his hands steady as heart numb. "Then I guess I finally get what I deserve," he said. Outside the thin walls of the den, the station groaned again, a metallic beast shifting in its sleep. The fire in Sector 12 burned on, consuming the evidence of one crime, while in the dark of the maintenance tunnels, the evidence of an older, greater crime sat breathing in the shadows. Reed Harlow had saved the girl. But as he looked at the reflection of his own face in the dark monitor, he knew that saving one life did not balance the ledger of 1,000 deaths. He was a shield today, but he would always be a sword in their memories. And somewhere 2 decks up, the men who had ordered the fire were watching the same monitors, smiling as the flames turned history into ash. "Patch," Reed said quietly. "Scan the perimeter. Active sonar. If anything larger than a rat moves in the pipes, wake me." The drone beeped a mournful acknowledgement. Reed sat in the chair, listening to the weeping of the enemy mother and the soft, terrified breathing of the child he had saved. He did not sleep. He simply waited for the ghosts to come, as they always did when the lights went out. The den was less a room and more a surgical scar in the station's anatomy. Reed had carved it out of a structural void between the main coolant interchange and the gravity generator, a space that did not exist on any official blueprint of Halcyon Spire. The walls were a patchwork of stolen acoustic foam and exposed bulkhead steel, dampening the constant bone-shaking thrum of the refinery to a manageable vibration. It smelled of ozone, stale, recycled air, and the faint, earthy scent of the algae tank bubbling in the corner. To Reed, it smelled like survival. To his guests, he imagined it smelled like a cage. Reed stood by the heavy blast door he had manually welded into the frame, listening to the locking tumblers engage. 1, 2, 3 clicks. Solid. He engaged the jammer next a jury-rigged black box that scrambled local sensor sweeps. Only then did he turn around. The small space felt suffocatingly crowded. Arya Silverpelt was slumped against the base of his workbench, her breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. Even wounded, even exhausted, she held herself with a rigid dignity that made the cramped quarters feel like a throne room she was forced to occupy. Her silver fur was matted with soot and drying blood, but her eyes, luminous amber pools with slit pupils, tracked Reed's every movement. She had positioned herself strategically, legs splayed, but body twisted, so that she formed a physical barrier between Reed and the child. Mira sat cross-legged behind the shield of her mother's body. She was shivering, clutching the wire doll, so tightly her knuckles were white under her russet fur. She looked at the room with wide, terrified curiosity, her gaze darting from the hanging tools to the flickering monitors and finally resting on Patch. The drone hovered nervously near the ceiling, its single optic lens rotating back and forth as if unsure where to look. "You are safe here," Reed said. His voice sounded too loud in the small room, rasping with the disuse of a man who spent his shifts talking only to machines. "The walls are lead-lined. Thermal scans cannot penetrate." Arya did not relax. "Safety is a luxury the prey does not get to feel in the predator's den," she said. Her voice was a low growl fighting through the pain. "Why bring us here? The bounty on a vulpine head is 5,000 credits. Is that not enough for you, Butcher?" Reed winced. The word butcher hit him harder than the plasma impact had. He walked to the metal sink and scrubbed his hands with harsh chemical soap, turning his back to them intentionally. It was a tactical error to show his back to an enemy, but it was a necessary social signal. He was disarming himself. "If I wanted the credits, I would have left you in the corridor for the turrets," Reed said, watching the gray water swirl down the drain. "And if I wanted you dead, I would not be wasting my medical supplies." He dried his hands and grabbed the medkit from the shelf. It was an old field medic's bag, stamped with the faded insignia of the United Terran Coalition. He knelt beside Arya, keeping his movements slow, and broadcasted. "That leg needs setting," Reed said, gesturing to her thigh, where the shrapnel had torn through. "And the burns on your arm are second degree. If the infection gets into your blood, you will be dead in 24 hours. Then the girl is alone." Arya stiffened. The threat to her mortality meant nothing, but the threat to Mira broke her resolve. She let out a sharp hiss of air through her teeth and nodded a microscopic dip of her chin. "Do not try anything," she warned. "I still have enough fire left to burn this metal coffin to ash." "I do not doubt it," Reed muttered. He opened the kit. The smell of antiseptic gel filled the room, sharp and clinical. Reed pulled out a pair of shears and reached for her leg. Arya flinched her claws, extending instinctively, scraping against the metal floor. "Sorry," Reed said. "I have to cut the fabric." He worked in silence. The shears snipped through the scorched combat trousers, revealing the wound. It was ugly. A jagged piece of alloy was lodged deep in the muscle, and the surrounding tissue was purple and swollen. Reed's hands, usually shaking with the tremors of age and nerve damage, became steady. His mind slipped into the old rhythm: assess, sterilize, extract, repair. It was a language he spoke better than he spoke to people. He applied a local anesthetic patch. "This will sting," he said. Arya bit her lip, suppressing a cry as the chemicals took hold. "You have done this before," she observed, watching his fingers move with practiced efficiency. "Not on machines, on flesh." "I was a soldier for 20 years, Reed said, focusing on the wound. He clamped the forceps onto the shrapnel. "Hold her hand, Mira." The girl scrambled forward, grabbing her mother's uninjured hand. Mira looked at Reed, her eyes huge. "Are you going to hurt her, Mr. Human?" "Just for a second," Reed said. "And my name is Reed." He pulled. The metal slid out with a wet sucking sound. Arya arched her back, a guttural keen escaping her throat, her grip on Mira's hand tightening until the girl whimpered. Reed immediately pressed a clotting sponge into the wound, followed by a layer of biofoam that sizzled as it sealed the tissue. "Breathe," Reed commanded softly. "It is done." He moved to her arm next. The burns were nasty, angry red streaks where the plasma heat had cooked the fur and skin. He applied a cooling gel. As he wrapped the bandage, his fingers brushed against the soft silver fur of her forearm. It was a strange sensation. For 10 years, the only things Reed had touched were cold metal, rough pipes, and the smooth plastic of his datapad. The warmth of a living being, even an alien one, sent a jolt through him. Arya pulled her arm back sharply as soon as the clip was secured. She stared at the tattoo on his bicep again, the skull and the shattered planet. "The 304th," she whispered. The venom was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunting sadness. "My brother died at Silver Dunes. He was a musician. He never held a gun." Reed packed the medical kit away. He did not look at her. "I am sorry." "Sorry?" Arya laughed, a brittle, broken sound. "You drop fire from the sky, turn a city of 2 million into glass. And you are sorry? Did you feel sorry when you pressed the button? Or did you just follow orders, like a good machine?" Reed sat back on his heels. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the ghosts of the dead. He looked at Mira. The girl was watching him, waiting for his answer, her judgment suspended in the innocent ignorance of youth. "I did not press the button," Reed said. His voice was low, a rumble in his chest. "I was the gunnery sergeant in charge of the orbital array. We received coordinates. They were marked as a military staging ground. Anti-air batteries, troop concentrations." "They were schools," Arya said coldly. "And hospitals." "I saw that," Reed said. He looked her in the eye then. The telemetry did not match the target profile. The heat signatures were too low. No heavy alloy shielding. I called a halt. I initiated a lockout on the firing sequence. Arya blinked. This was not the history she knew. The fire fell anyway. "The command override came from the flagship," Reed said. "From the corporate liaisons of Helios, who were advising the Admiral. They bypassed my console. I watched my screens turn red. I watched the firing solution execute while I was trying to cut the power cables with an emergency axe. The MPs tackled me before I could sever the main line." He looked down at his hands. They were scared not just from work, but from that day. "They court-martialed me for insubordination. But because the strike was a victory that ended the war, they could not execute me without raising questions. So they discharged me, dishonorable, scrubbed the logs to make it look like I hesitated out of cowardice, not moral objection." Arya studied him. She was an engineer. She understood systems, and she understood how easily data could be manipulated. She looked at the weary set of his shoulders, the poverty of his living conditions. This was not a man living on the pension of a war hero. This was a man hiding from his own name. "You expect me to believe that?" she asked, but her voice lacked its earlier bite. "I expect you to believe nothing," Reed said, standing up. His knees popped. "Wah. Belief is dangerous. Data is the truth. That is why you are here, is it not? You did not sneak onto a derelict refinery just to see the view." Arya exchanged a glance with Mira. The girl nodded a silent vote of confidence. "The logs," Arya said. "The Helios Central Archive for the sector is routed through the Halcyon Spire's data core before it is beamed to deep space storage. I came to find the original transmission logs from Silver Dunes, the ones that prove Helios knew what they were targeting." Reed froze. He turned to look at her. "You think the unscrubbed logs are here?" "I traced the routing signature," Arya said, shifting to a more comfortable position. "It is a ghost signal buried under layers of corporate noise. But it is here. I need to prove that Helios sold out your military, that they pushed for the strike not to end the war, but to clear the planet for mining rights." Reed let out a long, slow breath. "Mining rights, 2 million people for lithium and heavy water. And to sell new weapons to the coalition, Arya added. War is good for business. Peace is expensive. Mira piped up then, her voice small, but clear. Mama wants to show everyone the truth, so we do not have to run anymore. I just want to stop sleeping in crates. Reed looked at the child. Her stomach growled a loud, unmistakable rumble that broke the tension. Mira flushed her ears, flattening against her head. I am hungry, she whispered. Reed's face softened. The mask of the soldier slipped, revealing the tired grandfather beneath. Right, rations. He went to the algae tank and ladled out a bowl of green gelatinous paste. It wobbled unappealingly. He placed it on the floor near them. It is nutrient-dense, Reed said apologetically. Spirulina and protein synthesis. It tastes like wet cardboard, but it keeps you alive. Mira leaned forward and sniffed it. Her nose wrinkled. It smells like the floor. Arya let out a snort that might have been a laugh in another life. Human cuisine. Truly the apex of suffering. Reed cracked a faint smile. Patch fetched the emergency stash. The drone chirped and zipped to a high shelf, knocking down a foil-wrapped bar. Reed caught it. Chocolate, Reed said. Real chocolate. Or as real as it gets these days. Saved it for a special occasion. He broke the bar in half and handed it to Mira. She took it, gingerly sniffed it, and then took a small bite. Her eyes widened. Her tail gave a tentative wag, thumping against the metal floor. It is sweet, she declared. Mama, try it. She held the piece out to her mother. Arya hesitated, then took a tiny bite. She closed her eyes for a second, savoring the sugar. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated humanity, or sapience, shared over a piece of candy in a metal box floating in the void. Thank you, Arya said quietly. Mr. Reed. Just Reed, he corrected. He sat on his cot, keeping a respectful distance while they ate. So, you are a slicer, a hacker. I am a strategic systems engineer, Arya corrected her professional pride, flaring up. I designed the kinetic shielding grid for the Kitsari homeworld. Or I tried to before the budget was cut. An engineer, Reed mused. That explains the hardware. He pointed to the device attached to her belt. It was a strange piece of tech organic curves, meeting hard circuitry glowing with a faint violet light. That is a Kitsari cryptographic sequencer, isn't it? Arya's hand went to the device protectively. It is, modified. I built it to bypass the Helios handshake protocols. But, she frowned, pulling it off her belt. The casing was cracked, likely from the fall during the fire. The emitter is damaged. It is out of alignment. Without this, I cannot access the data spine. Reed stood up and walked over, extending his hand. Let me see. Arya hesitated, then handed it to him. Careful. The neural pathways are delicate. It is not a hammer. Reed put a jeweler's loop to his eye, examining the fractured casing. You are using a bio-neural interface to brute force a quantum lock. Clever. But your power draw is too high. It is overheating the crystals. He walked to his workbench. Patch, bring me the micro-solder and the optical resin. What are you doing? Arya asked, alarm creeping into her voice, as Reed picked up a menacing-looking pair of pliers. Fixing it, Reed grunted. And improving it. This is military-grade thinking, but it lacks practical application. You are trying to pick the lock with a feather. I am going to turn it into a breaching charge. Do not break it, Arya tried to stand, but her leg gave way. Sit, Reed ordered. I know machines. I do not care if they are made of silicon or grown in a vat. A circuit is a circuit. For the next hour, the room was filled with the smell of melting solar and the low murmur of Reed talking to his drone. Mira watched him fascinated. She crawled closer, dragging her doll. What is that? She asked, pointing to Patch. That is Patch, Reed said, not looking up from the microscopic wires he was splicing. He is a Model 4 maintenance drone. I found him in the trash compactor. Someone threw him away because his logic core had a stutter. He looks like a potato made of knives, Mira said. Reed chuckled. It was a rusty sound unused. He has character. Patch, say hello to the lady. Patch spun in the air and let out a series of musical beeps that sounded vaguely like hello Lolo. Mira giggled. It was a bright, sparking sound that seemed to push back the shadows of the room. Hello, Patch. I am Mira. Arya watched the interaction with a complex expression. She saw the way Reed's large, calloused hands moved with impossible delicacy over the tiny alien components. She saw the way he spoke to the drone and the child, without condescension, without malice. You kept the drone, Arya said softly. Because it was broken. Reed paused. I kept it because it still worked. It just needed someone to bypass the bad code. He looked up at her. We are all just trying to function with bad code, Arya. He snapped the casing of the sequencer back together. It hummed to life, the violet light, stabilizing into a steady, throbbing pulse. Here, Reed said, tossing it gently to her. I bypassed the safety limiters and rerouted the heatsink through the external casing. It will run hot, but it will crack a Helios firewall in 10 seconds flat. Just do not hold it with your bare hand when it cycles. Arya caught the device. She ran a diagnostic thumb swipe across the surface. Her eyes widened. Efficiency increase of 40%. The signal variance is null. She looked at him with newfound respect. You possess an intuitive understanding of nonlinear architecture. I hid it until it works, Reed shrugged. Human engineering. It is impressive, Arya admitted. For a brute. I will take the compliment. Reed stood up and stretched. Now the question is, what do we do with it? We cannot go to the data spine. The station is on high alert. The security teams will be sweeping sector by sector. Arya's face hardened. We have to try. If I leave without that data, the trip was for nothing. My people continue to be blamed for starting the war, and Helios continues to profit. And if you die, Reed countered, Mira becomes a ward of the state. Or worse. I know, Arya snapped. Do you think I do not know that every moment is a gamble? Let us see what we are dealing with first, Reed said. I can use your device to piggyback on the station's internal comms. If we can find out where the patrols are, we might find a route. He took the device back and plugged it into his wall of monitors. The screens flickered, static washing over them. Patch interface with the sequencer. Decrypt the security band. The drone jacked a cable into the device. The screens cleared. Instead of the visual feeds of corridors, the main monitor displayed a scrolling wall of text. It was a high-level command log. That is not a security patrol schedule, Arya said, leaning forward, squinting at the human text. That is a maintenance manifest. Reed read the lines, his blood turning to ice. No, it is not maintenance. He pointed to a line of code highlighted in red. Priority. Order 99 Alpha. Structural integrity, compromise. Sectors 10 through 40. What does that mean? Mira asked, sensing the fear in the adults. Sector 12 was just the test, Reed whispered. They are not just burning trash. He typed furiously on his keyboard, bringing up the station schematics. Look, they are disabling the magnetic containment fields on the main fusion drive. And here they are overriding the pressure valves on the volatile gas storage. Arya gasped. If those mix... It will not be a fire, Reed said grimly. It will be a kinetic event. An explosion large enough to shear the entire lower habitation ring off the station. The lower ring. Mira stood up, her doll dropping to the floor. That is where the refugees live. That is where Mr. Horg and the other families are. Thousands of people, Arya said, horror dawning on her face. Why destroy their own station? Reed scrolled down to the authorization signature at the bottom of the command. Authorized by Decade. CEO Helios Frontier Dynamics. Reason catastrophic industrial accident. Total asset liquidation. Insurance. Claim 445B. Because the station is old, Reed said, his voice shaking with rage. Because maintaining it costs more than the insurance payout. And because, he looked at Arya. Because if they blow the station, the data core is vaporized. Your evidence, the proof of Silver Dunes. It all disappears in a ball of nuclear fire. They are killing 5,000 people to balance a spreadsheet, Arya whispered, her ears flattened. Monsters. You are a species of monsters. Not all of us, Reed said. He grabbed his helmet. Not tonight. What are you doing? Arya asked. We cannot just hide, Reed said. He checked the charge on his pry bar. The ignition sequence is set for 6 hours from now. That is when the shift change happens, when the corridors are most crowded. We have to stop it, Mira said. She walked up to Reed and grabbed his hand. Her small, furry paw was swallowed by his gloved fingers. Mr. Reed, we have to save them, like you saved me. Reed looked down at the girl. He looked at the mother, who was struggling to stand pain, written on her face but fire burning in her eyes. He looked at the tattoo on his arm, the symbol of his failure. For 10 years he had been a ghost, a dead man haunting a dying machine. He had collected logs, hoping that someday someone else would bring justice. He had waited for a hero. But there were no heroes on Halcyon Spire. There was just a broken soldier, a wounded mother, and a child who believed in them. We are going to the data spine, Reed said. We are going to steal that log, and then we are going to jam the signal before they can detonate the drive. I cannot walk fast, Arya admitted, frustration bitter in her voice. Then I will carry you, Reed said. Patch combat protocols. No more silent running. The drone beeped a sharp, aggressive tone and extended a small arc welder arm that crackled with electricity. This is a bad plan, Arya said, a faint smile touching her lips. The odds are negligible. Never tell a soldier the odds, Reed said, unlocking the blast door. It just annoys us. He turned to Mira. Stay close to me. If I say duck, you duck. If I say run, you run. Understand? Yes, Mr. Reed. Mira said, her tail puffing up. I am ready. Reed opened the door. The dark, humid air of the tunnels rushed in to meet them. It smelled of grease and impending death. Let us go start a war, Reed said. He stepped out into the dark, no longer a maintenance worker, no longer a ghost. He was Sergeant Reed Harlow again, and this time he was not going to let the order stand. As they moved into the shadows, the lights of the station flickered overhead, a Morse code of dying systems calling out for salvation. Reed adjusted his grip on the pry bar. He hoped it would be enough. He hoped he would be enough. The hunt was on, but this time the prey had teeth. The humidity in the service tunnels had risen to a point where the air felt less like oxygen and more like a warm, wet towel pressed against the face. Reed Harlow adjusted the strap of his respirator, which hung loose around his neck, now that they were in the filtered zones, but the habit of checking his gear was a hard one to break. They stood at a junction of 3 pipes, a rust-colored crossroads in the bowels of Halcyon Spire. To the left lay the path to the thermal exhaust ports, a route that would take them toward the fusion drive assembly. To the right was the ascent toward the data spine, the central nervous system of the station. The argument had been going on for 5 minutes, conducted in fierce whispers that echoed off the damp metal walls. We go to the spine first, Arya Silverpelt insisted. She was leaning heavily against a support strut, her weight off her injured leg, but her eyes were burning with a feverish intensity. The data is the priority. If we stop the explosion but fail to secure the logs, Helios just tries again next week. And next time, they will not miss. And if we spend an hour hacking the spine while the pressure valves blow, Reed countered, his voice, a low rumble, like distant thunder. There won't be a station left to transmit from. We secure the volatile storage first. We stop the bomb. The bomb is a symptom. Arya snapped her tail, twitching with agitation. The lie is the disease. I came here for the truth about Silver Dunes. I did not come to play volunteer fireman for a human corporation. Reed stepped closer, his shadow looming over her. There are 5,000 people in the lower ring, Arya. Refugees. People like you and Mira. If that drive goes critical, they vaporize in less than 3 seconds. Is your data worth their ashes? Arya bared her teeth. It was not a threat, but a grimace of pain and frustration. Do not lecture me on the cost of lives, soldier. My people are already ash because of men like you who followed orders instead of seeking truth. The impasse was solid. 2 lifetimes of trauma colliding in a dark hallway, neither willing to yield ground. Reed was thinking tactically, save the lives immediately at risk. Arya was thinking strategically, destroying the enemy's ability to hide. Both were right, and that made it impossible. If Helios dies, a small voice cut through the tension. But everyone here dies too. What kind of justice is that? Reed and Arya stopped. They looked down. Mira was standing between them, looking smaller than ever in the gloom. She was clutching her wire doll in one hand and the hem of her scorched cloak in the other. Her large ears were swiveled forward, catching every nuance of their anger. If we die, Mira continued, her voice trembling but resolute, then nobody hears the story. And if the people in the ring die, then there is nobody left to listen to the story. So we have to do both. Reed looked at the fox girl. He felt a sudden sharp pang in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since before the court-martial. It was a shame. He was arguing logistics while a child was teaching him morality. He looked at Arya. The vulpine mother let out a long, shuddering breath. The fire in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a grudging respect. She is right, Arya murmured. Out of the mouths of kits, Reed nodded slowly. Both. We hit the data spine to secure the evidence, but we do it by routing through the auxiliary control subnet. We can use the spine's own processing power to override the fusion drive safeties remotely. It is harder. It requires a physical bypass of the air-gapped systems in the derelict sectors, but it does both. The derelict sectors, Arya repeated. She pushed herself off the wall. That means we need hardware. My sequencer is patched, but for a dual override, we need a synchronized signal booster, and I need a heuristic processor to handle the encryption. I know where to get them, Reed said. He checked the charge on his pry bar. The old armory on Deck 7. It was stripped 10 years ago, but the scavengers usually miss the embedded components. Then we are not just survivors anymore, Arya said, adjusting the strap of the bag Reed had given her. She looked at him, her amber eyes assessing. We are a team. Let us not get ahead of ourselves, Reed grunted, turning toward the darkness of the central tunnel. We are just 3 people trying not to explode. Move out. The journey to Deck 7 was a tour through the graveyard of industry. The Halcyon Spire had once been a jewel of orbital manufacturing, but now it was a rotting carcass picked clean by corporate greed. They moved through the shadows, Reed taking point, Patch, the drone hovering silently as a rearguard, and Arya, limping in the middle with Mira. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the distant groaning of the station's gravity stabilizers. They reached the old weapons manufacturing wing 20 minutes later. The blast doors were jammed half open, like the jaw of a dead beast. Inside, it was a cavern of dust and silence. Conveyor belts stood frozen in time, holding half-assembled plasma rifles that would never fire. Stay close, Reed whispered. Scavengers sometimes rig traps. He led them, not to the main assembly line, but to the quality control booths overlooking the floor. He kicked open a locked cabinet. Here, Reed said, pulling out a dusty circuit board the size of a dinner plate. Targeting logic module from a Mark IV siege cannon. It has a heuristic coprocessor. Arya took the board, blowing the dust off. She traced the golden circuitry with a claw. Primitive architecture, she muttered, but there was admiration in her voice. But robust. High thermal tolerance. I can bridge this with my sequencer. I need capacitors, Arya said, scanning the room. High output. Check the welding droids in the corner, Reed directed. While the adults worked stripping components from the dead machines, Mira wandered toward a side room. It had been a break room once, or perhaps a small chapel. There was a faded symbol of the universal faith on the wall, and overturned chairs scattered like bones. In the corner, something moved. Mira froze. Mr. Reed, she whispered. Reed was there, in a heartbeat moving with that terrifying speed that belied his age. He placed himself between Mira and the corner pry bar raised. Come out, Reed ordered. There was a whirring sound like a dying fan, and a small cylindrical robot rolled out of the shadows. It was a sanitation droid, a janitor-class unit, but it was in a sorry state. One of its optical sensors was dangling by a wire, and its chassis was dented as if someone had used it for target practice. It held a mop that had worn down to the nub. Please deposit trash, the bot stuttered, its voice synthesizer glitching. Do not litter on hallowed ground. Reed lowered the bar. It is just a scrub unit. Junk. He is hurt, Mira said. She knelt down, ignoring Reed's warning hand. The bot shrank back, spinning its mop defensively. No, no, Mira cooed, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a small piece of scrap metal she had picked up earlier. Look, it is okay. She looked up at Reed. Can we fix him? Like you fixed Patch. Reed sighed. Mira, we are on a mission to save the station. We do not have time to repair a trash can on wheels. But he can help, Mira insisted. He knows the tunnels. Janitors go everywhere, right? Even places people don't go. Arya looked up from the circuit board she was modifying. The girl has a point. Sanitation droids have access codes to the waste disposal chutes. Those chutes run parallel to the data spine cooling vents. Reed looked at the pathetic robot, then at the hopeful face of the fox girl. He groaned, a long, suffering sound that rumbled in his chest. Fine, Reed grumbled. He knelt beside the bot. Hold him steady. If he tries to mop my face, I will scrape him. Reed pulled a multi-tool from his belt. With a few deft movements, he popped the droid's maintenance panel. Logic core is fragmented. Power coupling is loose. He twisted a wire, bypassed a blown fuse, and reseated the optical sensor. Rebooting, Reed muttered. The bot shuddered. Its eye lit up a solid, healthy blue. It spun its wheels, did a little circle, and looked at Reed. Sanitation Unit 734 online, it chirped clearly. Dirt detected. Excessive dirt detected. It pointed a manipulator arm at Reed's muddy boots. Do not push your luck, Sparky, Reed warned. I am calling him Scrub, Mira declared, patting the droid's metal dome. Scrub, the droid repeated. Designation accepted. Awaiting orders, small organic. We need a path to the data spine, Reed said to the bot. Through the ventilation or waste subsystems. Avoid security patrols. Accessing custodial maps, Scrub word. Route calculated. Follow the path of least hygiene. Reed stood up, wiping grease on his trousers. He caught Arya watching him. Her expression was unreadable, soft around the edges. You have a habit of picking up strays, Arya said quietly, as they gathered their loot. I just hate seeing good machinery go to waste, Reed deflected. Is that what we are? Arya asked, gesturing to herself and Mira. Machinery, Reed looked at her. The bandages he had applied were holding, but she was pale. No, he said. Machines are easy to fix. You are complicated. Complicated is better than broken, she replied. They moved deeper into the station, following the little janitor bot as it navigated a maze of service catwalks. The air grew colder here, closer to the outer hull. To pass the time and, perhaps, to drown out the fear of what lay ahead, they talked. It started as tactical coordination, but drifted inevitably into the past. "You said you were court-martialed," Arya said. She was walking with a makeshift cane Reed had fashioned from a pipe. "For refusing to fire." "Insubordination in the face of the enemy," Reed quoted, his voice bitter. "Dereliction of duty. Cowardice. They threw the book at me. The only reason they did not hang me was that the war ended that day. It would have been bad PR to execute a soldier on Victory Day." "So they took your rank," Arya surmised. "They took my name," Reed said. "Reed Harlow died in that courtroom. I became a number, a drifting laborer. I came to Edris because it is the ass end of the galaxy. Nobody looks for heroes or cowards here." "We were in the camps," Arya said, her voice distant. "After the dunes burned. The Coalition put us in processing centers. They said it was for our protection. But the fences faced inward," Reed winced. He knew about the camps. Everyone knew, and everyone pretended they didn't. "They tested us," Arya continued. "They wanted to know if our bioluminescence could be weaponized, if our bone density made us better shock troops. I was pregnant with Mira. I spent 6 months hiding my belly under rags because I was afraid they would take her." She looked at Reed. "They called us potential assets, not people, just biological weapons waiting to be calibrated." Reed stopped. He turned to her. The dim emergency lights cast long shadows across his face. "I am sorry," he said again. It felt inadequate, a thimble of water on a forest fire, but it was all he had. "You refused the order," Arya said softly. "You lost your life because you would not take ours. That matters, Reed. It matters to me." She reached out. Her hand, covered in silver fur and tipped with sharp black claws, hesitated, then touched the side of his face. She adjusted the strap of his mask that had slipped loose. Reed froze. Her touch was warm, electric. He could smell the faint scent of ozone and wild herbs that clung to her fur. "Your ear," Reed stammered, his tactical brain short-circuiting. "The bandage. It is loose." He reached up, his large gloved hands clumsy, as he tucked a stray lock of her silver hair back behind her ear to secure the dressing. His fingers brushed against the sensitive velvet of her ear. Arya shivered, but she didn't pull away. "You humans," she whispered, looking up at him. "You are all wires and scar tissue. So hard on the outside. It keeps the soft parts safe," Reed murmured. "Are you two flirting, or just malfunctioning?" Mira's voice shattered the moment. She was standing 10 feet ahead, with scrub hands on her hips, looking unimpressed. Reed pulled back as if he had been burned. Arya coughed, smoothing her tunic, her cheeks flushing a darker shade beneath her fur. "We are conducting a tactical equipment check," Reed said gruffly. "Scrub says that is a lie," Mira giggled. "Scrub needs a mute button," Reed muttered, marching past them. But the air between them had changed. The cold distance of enemies was gone, replaced by something fragile and terrifyingly hopeful. "Halt," Scrub chirped. The bot stopped at a junction, leading to the auxiliary power control room. Organic contamination detected ahead. High threat level. Reed signaled for silence. He crept forward, peering around the bend. Down the corridor, a squad of 4 Helios security troopers was sweeping the area. They were not standard rent-a-cops. These were heavy corporate Marines wearing full environment suits and carrying pulse rifles. They were checking door seals. "They are sweeping for us," Reed whispered, retreating to the group. "They are blocking the route to the substation." "Can we go around?" Arya asked. "Not without adding 20 minutes to the trip," Reed said. "We have to go through." Arya's claws extended. A blue flicker of foxfire lit up her palm. "Then we fight." "No," Reed grabbed her wrist. "No killing. If we kill them, we are just terrorists. We need to be the good guys, remember? Besides, gunfire trips the acoustic sensors." How do you stop 4 armored Marines without shooting them? Arya asked skeptically. Reed looked at the ceiling. He looked at the heavy pipes running along the walls. A plan formed a geometric diagram of forces and pressures. Physics, Reed said. Hide behind that bulkhead. Patch, get ready to override the local gravity plate on my mark. Reed moved. He did not draw a weapon. He pulled a wrench from his belt and shimmied up a support strut into the darkness of the ceiling rafters. Below, the Marines advanced. Sector clear. Moving to next checkpost. Reed dropped. He didn't land on them. He landed on the manual release valve of the main steam conduit running parallel to their position. He swung the wrench, smashing the rusted locking nut. Gah! A jet of superheated steam erupted into the corridor, creating an instant wall of white fog. The Marines shouted their thermal visors, blinded by the sudden heat bloom. Contact! Contact! Patch now! Reed yelled from the ceiling. The drone hovering near the floor control panel jacked in. The gravity plating in the corridor section inverted. The 4 Marines, heavy in their armor, were suddenly weightless. They flailed, floating off the deck. Reed swung down from the rafters like a pendulum, using a cable he had secured. He kicked off the wall, using the momentum to launch himself through the steam. He didn't strike to kill. He tried to disable it. He grabbed the first Marine by the ankle and used the man's own momentum to spin him into the wall clang. The armor locked up. He landed on the ceiling, which was now the floor for the localized gravity, and fired his pneumatic rivet gun, thwip, thwip, thwip. He didn't shoot the men. He shot the joints of their armor. The hardening foam in the rivets expanded instantly, freezing the servos in their suits. Within 10 seconds, it was over. 4 Marines were floating in 0G. Their suits locked in rigid poses, blind in the steam. They were alive, unhurt, but completely immobilized. Reed dropped back to the floor as Patch normalized the gravity. The Marines crashed down with a heavy clatter of useless armor. Reed walked over to the squad leader, pulled the comms unit from the man's helmet, and crushed it under his boot. Stay down, Reed advised the struggling soldier. The foam dissolves in 2 hours. By then it won't matter. He turned to Arya and Mira, who were peeking out from the bulkhead. Arya's mouth was slightly open. You, Arya stared at the groaning soldiers. You neutralized a heavy squad in 15 seconds, and you did not draw blood. Soldiers, follow orders, Reed said, adjusting his harness. They are just paychecks, Arya. They are not the enemy. The enemy is the one signing the checks. Arya looked at the butcher of Silver Dunes. She saw the precision, the discipline, and the mercy. The image of the monster she had hated for 10 years finally crumbled, replaced by the reality of the man standing before her. You are not a butcher, she said softly. You are a surgeon. Come on, Reed said, feeling uncomfortable with the praise. The substation is clear. The auxiliary control room was a cramped closet of blinking lights and humming servers. It was the back door to the station's brain. Arya plugged her modified sequencer into the terminal. She slotted in the scavenger board and the chips they had found. Patching in, she said, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. Scrub monitor the thermal output. Do not let this board melt. Cooling. Scrub chirped, blowing air from a vent onto the circuit board. Reed stood guard at the door, watching the corridor. How long bypassing the firewall now? Arya said. I am in the sublayer, accessing the Helios executive logs. She swiped a hand through the data stream. Searching for Silver Dunes, incident report. Her eyes widened. I found it, but there is a new file, uploaded 2 hours ago. Open it, Reed said. Arya expanded the file. It was a video log, but it was encrypted with a biometric lock. I can crack this, Arya said, her eyes glowing with the reflection of the data. Give me 10 seconds. The screen flickered. Static cleared. A face appeared. It was a human face, middle-aged, handsome in a polished, synthetic way. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his suit impeccable. He sat behind a desk that looked like it cost more than the entire Halcyon Spire. Reed's grip on his prybar tightened, until the metal groaned. "Damien Cade," Reed hissed. "That is him," Mira asked, looking at the man who looked like a kind uncle. "That is the CEO of Helios," Arya said, her voice shaking with rage. "The man who sat on the oversight committee for the war." On the screen, Cade was speaking to someone off camera. "The audit is scheduled for next week. We cannot have the investigators tripping over old bones. The Halcyon Spire asset is depreciated. Initiate protocol, clean slate." A voice off-screen asked, "And the personnel, sir? There are 3,000 contractors and 2,000 refugees on board." Cade smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Collateral metrics are within acceptable loss parameters. Frame it as a catastrophic reactor failure, due to, let us say, vulpine sabotage. It fits the narrative. It keeps the fear alive. And it clears the ledger." The video ended. The room was silent. The cold calculation of mass murder was heavier than the air pressure. "Vulpine sabotage," Arya whispered. "He is going to blow the station and blame us. Again." "He is rewriting history before it even happens," Reed said. Suddenly, the live feed on the security monitor flickered. It showed the main docking bay of the Halcyon Spire. A sleek silver luxury shuttle was docking. The hull bore the golden sunburst of Helios. And stepping out onto the ramp flanked by elite guards was Damien Cade himself. "He is here," Reed said, staring at the screen. "Why?" Arya asked. "Why come to a station he is about to destroy?" "Ego," Reed said. "He wants to watch. He wants to be here, to manage the crisis personally, to look like the grieving leader while the station burns behind him. It sells the lie better if he is on the ground." Reed looked at Arya. He looked at the timestamp on the detonation sequence. 1 hour remaining. A dark, dangerous clarity settled over him. "Change of plan," Reed said. "We are not stopping the explosion," Mira asked, worried. "We are," Reed said. "But we are not just going to save the station and run away. Cade is here." He walked right into the crime scene. He looked at Arya. "Can you patch this terminal into the station-wide broadcast system, not just the speakers? The hollows, the external comms buoys, everything." Arya looked at the schematic. She smiled, a slow, predatory baring of fangs. "The data spine connects to the interstellar relay. If I bridge the connection, I can broadcast to every ship station and news outlet in the sector." "Good," Reed said. He picked up his helmet and checked the seal. "We are not just going to steal the evidence," Reed said. "We are going to put Damien Cade on trial, live, tonight." "He has an army," Arya warned. "And we have a janitor bot and a prybar." Reed looked at the team. A crippled veteran, a wounded mother, a child, a drone, and a trash can. "He has an army," Reed agreed. "But he thinks he has already won. That is his weakness." He opened the door. "Let us go make him choke on the truth." As they stepped out, the station shuddered again. The fusion drive was destabilizing. The clock was ticking. But for the first time in 10 years, Reed Harlow wasn't running away from the fire. He was walking into it, and this time, he wasn't alone. The announcement echoed through the hollow bones of Halcyon Spire, a synthetic voice devoid of empathy, bouncing off the rusted bulkheads and down the long, oil-stained corridors. "Attention, all personnel. Technical anomaly detected in Sector 4. Mandatory relocation protocols are now in effect. Please proceed to the designated assembly points immediately. This is for your safety. Helios Frontier Dynamics thanks you for your cooperation." Reed Harlow adjusted the strap of his respirator, his eyes narrowing as he watched the monitor mounted on the wall of the service tunnel. The feed showed the lower levels, the habitation ring where the contract laborers and refugees lived. They were not being moved to the hangars. The security teams, dressed in riot gear that gleamed under the harsh halogen lights, were herding the crowds deeper into the station, toward the structural weak points near the primary fusion drive. "They are not evacuating them," Reed said, his voice a low growl that vibrated in his chest. "They are consolidating the biomass." Arya Silverpelt stood beside him, leaning heavily on the makeshift cane Reed had fashioned. Her silver ears were flattened against her skull, twitching with every distant thud of heavy boots. "They are moving them to the blast zone," she whispered, "to make sure there are no survivors to contradict the story." "Standard containment protocol," Reed noted grimly. "If you cannot control the narrative, you erase the witnesses." Mira, huddled between them with Scrub, the janitor bot, and Patch, looked up. Her large eyes were wide, with a terror that was too old for her young face. "Mr. Horga's down there," she said quietly, "and the baker who gives me crusts. Are they going to burn?" Reed looked down at the child. He saw the soot on her nose, the tremble in her small hands. He tightened his grip on his heavy pry bar. "Not if we get to the data spine," Reed said. "We have 40 minutes before the fusion cycle hits critical mass. We need a shortcut." He pulled out his data pad. "I know a guy. Jax Rowan. He runs the lift override in Sector 7. If he opens the freight elevator, we can bypass the security checkpoints and go straight to the core." Arya looked skeptical. "You trust a human with a Helios paycheck?" "I trust Jax," Reed said, though he felt a knot of unease in his stomach. "We served on the same frigate years ago. He is a coward, but he is not a killer. And he owes me 2,000 credits from a poker game in '98. The meeting point was a maintenance junction halfway up the station's spine. It was a dark, dripping space where the humidity condensed on the walls and ran down like sweat. Jax Rowan was waiting. He was a thin man, nervous with grease under his fingernails and a twitch in his left eye. He jumped when Reed stepped out of the shadows. "Reed!" Jax hissed, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. "You look like hell. And you brought guests." He eyed Arya and Mira with a mixture of fear and distaste. "A Vulpine, are you insane?" "The kill order is broadcast on every channel. 5,000 credits for the adult, 10,000 for the child." "Good to see you too, Jax," Reed said, keeping his voice level. "I need the freight lift. Just a quick ride up to the spine. Then we disappear." Jax swallowed hard. He looked at the data pad in his hand, then back at Reed. "You know they are saying you caused the fire, that you are a saboteur working with alien terrorists." "Do I look like a terrorist, Jax?" Reed asked, stepping closer. "Or do I look like the guy who fixed your atmospheric scrubbers when you were too hungover to do your shift?" Jax flinched. He looked down at his boots. "I have debts, Reed. Gambling debts. Bad people." Reed stopped. The soldier in him sensed the shift in the air before his conscious mind processed it. The silence in the tunnel was too heavy. The hum of the ventilation fans had cut out. "Jax," Reed said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Why is the lift already descending?" Jax looked up, and there were tears in his eyes. "I am sorry, Reed. The bounty clears my debt. It buys me a ticket off this rock." The blast doors behind Jax hissed open. They did not reveal an empty elevator car. They revealed a kill squad. 6 mercenaries, not standard security, but heavy-hitter contractors, with tactical armor and laser carbines, poured out of the lift. They moved with the professional efficiency of men who killed for money, not ideology. "Target acquired," the lead mercenary shouted, his voice amplified. "Secure the child, neutralize the combatants." "Run," Reed roared. He swung his pry bar not at the soldiers, but at the hydraulic line running along the wall next to Jax. The pipe burst with a deafening screech, spraying high-pressure hydraulic fluid into the air. It was a blinding, slippery mist. Jax screamed as the fluid hit him, scrambling away. "Back into the maze!" Reed shoved Arya and Mira toward the narrow catwalks that crisscrossed the open shaft of the ventilation processing unit. Laser fire sizzled through the air, burning ozone trails past Reed's head. One shot clipped his shoulder plate, spinning him around. He recovered, instantly grabbing Scrub the janitor bot and hurling the metal trash can down the corridor toward the soldiers. "Cleaning cycle initiated," Scrub chirped cheerfully as he sailed through the air. The bot crashed into the lead mercenary's legs, tripping him. It was a momentary distraction, but it bought them 3 seconds. Reed ushered Arya and Mira onto the catwalk. It was a precarious metal grating suspended over a drop of 300 meters into the grinding machinery of the recycling pit. "Go, do not look down," Reed ordered. They ran. The sound of boots ringing on metal was deafening. Behind them, the mercenaries rallied their boots, mag-locking to the floor as they advanced through the hydraulic mist. "Suppressing fire," a voice commanded. Bolts of red energy hammered the catwalk. Sparks showered down like fireworks. Reed stayed at the rear, using his own body as a mobile shield, deflecting shots with the heavy alloy of his pry bar and the reinforced plating of his back. "We are cut off!" Arya shouted from ahead. The catwalk ended at a retractable bridge that was currently retracted. A gap of 5 meters separated them from the service door on the other side. "Patch," Reed yelled. "Bridge controls Hackett." The drone zipped to the control panel on the far side, interfacing with the port. The bridge began to extend, agonizingly slow. "Faster!" Reed gritted his teeth, turning to face the pursuers. He was 50 years old, his joints ached, and he was outgunned 6-1. But he had the high ground, and he had nothing left to lose. A mercenary tried to rush him. Reed waited until the man was committed, then dropped low, sweeping the pry bar at the man's ankles. Bone crunched. The mercenary fell, sliding dangerously close to the edge. "Flashbang!" one of the soldiers yelled. Reed saw the canister arc through the air. "Down!" he screamed, tackling Arya and Mira, covering them. Bang! The world turned white. A ringing silence filled Reed's ears. He was disoriented, his vision swimming. He felt Arya struggling beneath him, coughing. He forced himself up. The bridge was halfway across. "Jump!" Reed grabbed Mira and literally threw her across the remaining gap. She landed on the other side, rolling into a ball. "Arya, go!" Arya limped to the edge and leaped. She caught the railing on the far side, her claws digging into the metal. Reed grabbed her harness and hauled her up. He turned to jump himself, but a laser bolt caught him in the chest. The impact knocked the wind out of him. He staggered, falling onto the extending bridge. "Reed!" Mira screamed. He scrambled up. The mercenaries were on the catwalk now. "Blow the bridge!" Reed yelled to Patch. The drone beeped negatively. "Do it!" Patch sent a voltage spike into the hydraulic couplings. The bridge beneath Reed groaned and lurched. He sprinted the last few meters, diving onto the platform, just as the walkway behind him sheared off, plunging into the darkness below, taking 2 mercenaries with it. They were safe for the moment, but they were trapped in the heavy engineering sector, and the enemy knew exactly where they were. The chase continued for what felt like hours, though it was likely only 20 minutes. They moved through the guts of the station, through steam tunnels, over coolant tanks, and up narrow maintenance ladders. Reed was bleeding. A piece of shrapnel from the bridge explosion had lodged in his side just below the ribs. He pressed a hand against it, his glove coming away sticky and dark, but he said nothing. They reached a large open chamber, the thermal exchange gallery. It was a forest of massive vertical pipes hissing with steam. Catwalks threaded through the pipes like spiderwebs. "We are close to the spine," Reed wheezed. "Just across this gallery." "Contact front," Arya hissed. A second team of mercenaries had flanked them. They emerged from the doors ahead, blocking the exit. And behind them, the remnants of the first squad were catching up. They were pinned. "Cover!" Reed shoved Arya and Mira behind a thick coolant pipe. Laser fire erupted from both sides, the air filled with the smell of burning metal and ozone. "Give us the girl," the mercenary captain shouted, "and we will make your deaths quick." "Go to hell," Reed shouted back, firing his rivet gun blindly around the corner. It was a useless gesture. The rivets bounced harmlessly off military-grade armor. Mira was crying, huddled in a ball. "I am scared, Mr. Reed, I am scared." "It is okay, kid," Reed said, though he knew it was a lie. "I got you." Then chaos struck. A mercenary on the upper gantry took a shot. He wasn't aiming for Reed. He was aiming for the pipe to flush them out with steam. His aim was poor. The bolt ricocheted off the pipe and grazed Mira's shoulder. It was not a lethal hit. It was a burn, a painful, searing line across her arm. But for a terrified child of a species reactive to emotion, it was the catalyst. Mira screamed. It was a sound that transcended vocal cords, a psychic shriek of pure panic. And with the scream came the fire. Foxfire was not just combustion. It was emotional energy made physical. Triggered by pain and fear, Mira's latent abilities exploded. A sphere of blue and violet flame erupted from her small body, expanding outward with the force of a shockwave. "Mira, no!" Arya yelled, shielding her eyes. The fire was wild, uncontrolled. It swirled around the girl, a vortex of heat that melted the grating of the floor. The mercenaries stopped firing. They stared at the phenomenon. "Target creates a high-value energy signature." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, loud and clear in the sudden silence. "Secure the asset. The Foxchild is the key. Do not damage the merchandise." Reed saw a mercenary raising a stun net launcher. He did not hesitate. He grabbed his heavy fire-resistant maintenance coat, the one he had worn for 6 years in the freezing dark, and threw it over his head. He dove into the blue inferno. The heat was intense. It bypassed his thermal undersuit, blistering his skin. But he pushed through. He reached the center of the storm, where Mira was curled up, screaming. "I have you," Reed roared over the roar of the flames. He wrapped the coat around her, smothering the fire, pulling her small, trembling body against his chest. He curled around her, presenting his armored back to the mercenaries. Thwump, thwump. 2 stun rounds hit Reed's back. His armor absorbed the shock, but his muscles locked up in a spasm of agony. He grunted, falling to his knees, but he did not let go of the girl. "I have the asset," Reed shouted, his voice hoarse, trying to confuse the mercenaries, trying to make them think he was subduing her so they would stop shooting. "Hold fire, I have her!" From across the gantry, through the smoke and the fading blue light, Arya heard him. She heard the mercenary captain say, "The Foxchild is the key." She saw Reed wrap her daughter in a bag. She heard Reed shout, "I have the asset!" The world tilted on its axis. The trauma of 10 years, the camps, the experiments, the humans who smiled while they locked the cages came crashing down on Arya. She saw the scene, not as a rescue, but as a capture. The Butcher of Silver Dunes had finally claimed his prize. "No!" Arya shrieked. Her eyes turned a solid glowing white. The fur on her neck stood straight up. She ignored her broken leg. She ignored the guns pointed at her. She moved with the desperate, insane speed of a mother whose worst nightmare had just manifested. She leaped over the pipe. She didn't attack the mercenaries. She attacked Reed. She slammed into him, knocking him flat. Her claws tore through the back of his thermal suit. She grabbed him by the collar of his armor and dragged him and Mira toward the service hatch to their right. "Get inside!" she screamed at Mira, shoving the bundled child through the door. She dragged Reed in after her and slammed the lock override. They were in a small turbine control room, safe from the mercenaries for a moment. But Reed was not safe. Arya threw him against a bank of servers. She was on him, instantly pinning him to the metal. Her hand was wreathed in white-hot foxfire. Her claws pressed against his carotid artery. "You traitor!" Arya screamed, spittle flying from her bare fangs. "You liar! You monster!" Reed couldn't breathe. Her weight was crushing his chest. He looked up at her, bewildered, his face blackened with soot. "Arya, wait!" "Wait for what?" She hissed, tears streaming down her face, sizzling as they hit the fire in her hand. "Wait for you to hand her over. I heard them secure the asset. And you grabbed her. You bagged her like a specimen." "I was shielding her," Reed gasped. "You were packaging her," Arya roared. She pressed her claws harder. A bead of blood trickled down Reed's neck. "You led us here. You led us to the trap. It was all a game, wasn't it? The sad veteran act. The I didn't push the button story. It was all to get me to trust you, so you could deliver the last daughter of Silver Dunes to Helios." She raised her burning hand. The heat was unbearable. She was going to burn his face off. She was going to kill him, and she was going to enjoy it. "I should have killed you in the tunnel," she sobbed. "I should have ripped your throat out the moment I saw that tattoo." Reed looked at her. He saw the madness of grief in her eyes. He knew he couldn't overpower her, not without hurting her, and he refused to hurt her. He stopped struggling. He went limp. He looked her in the eyes, accepting his fate. If this was how he paid for the sins of his species, then so be it. "Do it," Reed whispered. Arya's hand trembled. The fire roared. She tensed her muscles to strike. "Mama, don't attack!" The scream came from the corner of the room. Mira had struggled out of the heavy coat. She was bruised, her fur singed, holding her shoulder where the laser had grazed her. But she threw herself across the room. She didn't run to her mother. She threw herself on top of Reed. "Mama, stop!" Mira cried, spreading her small arms to cover Reed's face. "The human veteran shielded me from fire. He always does." Arya froze. The white fire in her hand flickered. Mira got away from him. "He is the enemy." "No," Mira shouted, her voice cracking. "He is not. Look at him." She grabbed Reed's face with her small paws, turning it toward her mother. "When the first fire happened, he jumped in front of the turret. When the air broke, he gave me his mask. When the bad men shot, he wrapped me in his coat. He burned his back, so I would not burn." Mira was sobbing now. Huge, heaving breaths. "He gave me chocolate. He fixed scrub. He saved you. Why do you want to hurt him? Why?" Arya stared at her daughter. She stared at Reed, who was lying there bleeding, looking at Mira with an expression of such profound tenderness and fear for the child, not for himself. The adrenaline began to fade. The madness receded, leaving a cold, hollow horror in its wake. Arya looked at Reed's shoulder. The coat she had torn away, the thermal suit underneath, was shredded by her claws. And beneath that, Reed slowly sat up, gently moving Mira aside. He reached up and unclasped the top of his armor. He reached into the pocket of his undershirt over his heart. He pulled out a set of dog tags. They were old tarnished titanium. He held them out to Arya. "Read it," Reed said hoarsely. Arya took the tags. Her hands were shaking so hard they rattled. "Name Harlow Reed, rank Gunnery Sergeant, Unit 304th Orbital Siege. Status, dishonorable discharge, crime refusal to engage target, insubordination, sabotage of military assets." Arya read the words. Refusal to engage. Sabotage. She looked at Reed's chest. Now that the shirt was torn, she could see the scars. Not combat scars. These were whip marks, burn marks. The kind of scars left by torture, or by enhanced interrogation in a military brig. "I tried to cut the cables," Reed said softly. "They used a stun baton on me until my heart stopped. Then they revived me and did it again. They wanted me to sign a confession saying I was drunk. I never signed it." He looked at the tattoo on his arm, the skull and planet. He touched it with a dirty finger. "I kept the tattoo," Reed said, "not because I am proud, but because I never want to forget what I failed to stop. I carry your dead on my skin, Arya, every day." Arya dropped the dog tags. They clattered on the floor like coins. She looked at her sequencer device, which was still clipped to her belt. She pulled it off and frantically plugged it into the server bank next to Reed. "Show me," she whispered to the machine. "Show me his service record, the unredacted file." The sequencer whirred. With the access she had gained earlier, it bypassed the public records. It pulled the shadow file. The text scrolled across the tiny screen. Subject Harlow. Action attempted lockout of firing solution. 304. Notes. Subject repeatedly warned command of civilian presence. Subject physically assaulted superior officer to prevent launch. It was true, all of it. He was not the butcher. He was the only man who had tried to save them. Arya let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She fell to her knees. The guilt was a physical blow. She had almost killed him. She had almost killed the one decent man in a galaxy of monsters. "I am sorry," she wept, bowing her head until it touched the floor. I am sorry, Reed sat up. He groaned, clutching his side. He reached out and placed a hand on her head, resting it between her ears. "It is okay," Reed said. "You were protecting your cub. I would have done the same." Mira crawled into the space between them. She hugged Reed's waist and Arya's arm, bridging the gap. "We are a pack," she whispered. "We do not hurt the pack." Reed looked at the mother and daughter. He felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. It was the feeling of being seen, of being known. "Patch," Reed said to the drone hovering in the corner. "Status." Patch beeped a frantic warning. "The door," Reed translated. "They are cutting through." Sparks began to shower from the hinges of the blast door. The mercenaries were using a plasma cutter. "We have 5 minutes," Reed said, struggling to his feet. He offered a hand to Arya. She looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. She took it, her grip firm, her claws retracted. "We need to get to the data spine," Arya said, wiping her eyes. Her voice was steady, again, cold and dangerous. "I have the authentication keys now. If we plug in, I can broadcast everything. The evacuation order, the bomb, and your file read. I will show them who the real hero was." "I do not care about being a hero," Reed said, picking up his pry bar. "I just want Cade to lose." "Attention station," the PA system boomed again, interrupting them. "Critical failure in fusion drive 1. Catastrophic containment breach imminent in 10 minutes. This is not a drill. All personnel evacuate to the upper life pods." 10 minutes, Reed checked his wrist comp. "That is a lie. The pressure curve gives us 12. "They are speeding it up," Arya said. "They know we are close." Reed looked at the vent above the server bank. "Scrub says that leads to the main cooling shaft of the spine. It is a straight drop. We slide down." "And the mercenaries?" Arya asked. Reed looked at the door, glowing red-hot. "We leave them a present." He went to the hydrogen coolant tanks lining the wall. He opened the valves just enough to let the gas hiss out, filling the room. "Patch," Reed said. "Set a remote detonator on your power core. Overload it on my signal." The drone chirped a sad, brave little sound. "No, not you, buddy," Reed said gently. "Just drop your spare battery pack. We can rig it." They scrambled into the vent. Reed went last. He looked back at the room filled with flammable gas. He looked at the glowing door where the killers were cutting through. "If we fail tonight," Reed whispered to the darkness, "I stay the monster in every history book, and Cade wins." Arya's voice floated back from the shaft, fierce and final. "So we do not fail. We make them choke on the truth." Reed slid into the shaft. He triggered the seal just as the blast door gave way. Below him, he heard the mercenaries shout. Then he heard the spark, boom. The explosion rocked the shaft, propelling them downward on a cushion of hot air. They were falling toward the heart of the station, toward the truth, and toward the end of the world. Reed held on to Mira. Arya held on to Reed. The descent began. The data spine of Halcyon Spire was a cathedral of silence and cold light. It was a cylindrical chamber, 50 meters high, lined with towering banks of crystalline servers that pulsed with the heartbeat of a billion data streams. The air here was frigid, kept at sub-zero temperatures to cool the processors, and it smelled of liquid nitrogen and the sterile absence of life. Reed Harlow, Arya Silverpelt, and Mira stumbled out of the service vent, their boots hitting the polished obsidian floor with a jarring clatter. They looked like wrecks, soot-stained, bleeding, their clothes torn, invading a temple of pristine order. "We are in," Reed wheezed, leaning on his pry bar. His side was a mask of agony, where the shrapnel had dug in, but adrenaline was a potent drug. Arya limped toward the central console, a pedestal of white alloy rising from the center of the room. Mira trailed behind, clutching her scorched doll, her eyes wide as she took in the blue glow that washed over them. "Patch," Reed ordered. "Guard the vent. If anything comes down that shaft, electrocute it." The drone beeped a grim affirmative and took up a sentry position. Arya reached the console. She unclipped her modified sequencer, now battered and scarred from the escape, and jacked it into the primary port. "Handshake protocol initiating," Arya muttered, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. "Bypassing the Helios firewall now." The room turned red. "Warning," a synthetic voice boomed. "Unauthorized access detected. Security teams dispatched." "We knew that was coming," Reed said, limping to the edge of the platform to watch the main blast doors. "How long will it take to crack the encryption?" "The encryption is polymorphic," Arya said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It changes every 3 seconds." "But I have the key." She looked at Reed. "Your service number. The old override code you used at Silver Dunes." Reed nodded. 749 Alpha Zulu. Arya typed it in. The red light vanished, replaced by a steady, calming green. "Access granted," the computer intoned. "We are in the brain," Arya breathed. "I can see everything. The fusion drive destabilization sequence is at 92%. 8 minutes to detonation." "Stop it," Reed said. "I am trying." Arya's hands were a blur. "But there is a lockout, a manual override from the executive suite." Suddenly, the main holographic projector in the center of the room flared to life. A pillar of light materialized into the form of a man, Damien Cade. He was not sitting in his office this time. He was standing on the bridge of the station, looking down at them with an expression of mild amusement, as if he were watching a particularly dull play. "Mr. Harlow," Cade said, his voice smooth and amplified. "And Ms. Silverpelt, I presume. You have caused quite a bit of damage to my property tonight." "We are about to cause a lot more," Reed growled. "Call off the detonation, Cade." "We have the logs," Cade laughed. It was a dry, soulless sound. "The logs? You mean the corrupted data files of a disgraced soldier and a terrorist hacker who will believe you? I have the entire United Terran Coalition media network on standby to broadcast the tragic news of the Vulpine attack on Halcyon Spire." He stepped closer to the camera, his holoform looming over them. "You are relics. You are debris from a war that ended 10 years ago. The galaxy has moved on. Helios is the future. Stability, profit, order. And you are just a glitch in the algorithm." "Glitches crash systems," Arya said, not looking up from her work. "And glitches are deleted," Cade countered. "Security is cutting through the main doors. You have 4 minutes. Enjoy the view." The holo flickered out. Reed looked at the massive blast doors at the far end of the chamber. Sparks were already flying from the hinges. "He is right about one thing," Reed said. "Nobody listens to a local broadcast. We need a megaphone." He looked at Arya. "Reroute the transmitter. We are not sending this to the station. We are sending it to the relay, to every ship, every planet, every newsfeed in the sector." "That requires bypassing the carrier wave limiters," Arya said. "It will fry the antenna after one transmission." "We only need one," Reed said. Arya nodded. She tapped a final sequence. "Ready, on your mark." Reed walked to the center of the platform, He pulled off his respirator mask, letting it drop to the floor. He wanted them to see his face, the scars, the age, the truth. "Mira," Reed said gently. "Come here." The fox girl hesitated, then stepped up beside him. "Are you scared?" Reed asked. "Yes," Mira whispered. "Good," Reed said. "That makes you brave." He looked at Arya. "Now." Arya hit the enter key. Across the sector screens changed. In the opulent penthouses of Terra Prime, the evening newsfeed glitching into static. In the crowded bars of the mining colonies, the sports broadcasts cut out. On the bridges of Coalition dreadnoughts, tactical displays were replaced by a live feed. A face appeared. A human face, weathered and scarred, standing next to a vulpine woman with silver fur and a small, frightened fox child. "My name is Reed Harlow," the man said. His voice was not the polished baritone of a news anchor. It was the gravel of a man who had swallowed too much smoke. 10 years ago, I was the gunnery sergeant of the 304th. History says I was a coward who refused to fire on a military target at Silver Dunes. He held up his arm, showing the tattoo. History is a lie. Arya stepped forward. She did not look like a terrorist. She looked like an engineer. She pulled up a holographic display next to her, streaming the raw data logs they had decrypted. "This is the original targeting telemetry from that day," Arya said, her voice clear and sharp. "Look at the heat signatures. No weapons, no shields. Just schools, hospitals, homes." She swiped her hand, and the screen changed to the current status of Halcyon Spire. "And this," she continued, "is what is happening right now. Helios Frontier Dynamics is not containing a vulpine attack. They are overloading their own fusion drive. They are about to murder 5,000 refugees and workers to collect an insurance payout and bury the evidence of their past crimes." The feed showed the command authorization glowing in damning red text, "Ath, decade." "They call us monsters," Reed said, putting a hand on Mira's shoulder. "They call us enemies. But look." He pulled Mira closer. The human veteran and the fox child stood together, a living contradiction to a decade of propaganda. "We are not the ones burning the station," Reed said. "We are the ones trying to save it." In the data spine, the air was thick with tension. "The upload is complete," Arya whispered. "It is out. They cannot stop it." "But the bomb is still ticking," Reed said. 95%. "I am accessing the shutdown protocols," Arya said. She delved deeper into the code, her fingers dancing. "I need to isolate the feedback loop Kate installed." She froze. Her hands stopped moving. Her ears went flat against her head. "What is it?" Reed asked, sensing the shift in her energy. Arya was staring at a block of code in the subroutine. It was a complex algorithm designed to mask the energy signature of the fusion overload, making it look like a reactor malfunction. It was elegant code, brutally efficient, and it was signed. Hidden in the metadata of the algorithm was a digital signature, A. Silverpelt, version 1.0, dated 10 years ago. Arya stumbled back from the console, as if she had been struck. "No!" she gasped. "No, no, no." "Arya!" Reed stepped toward her. "What is wrong?" "This code," Arya whispered, her voice trembling with horror. "The masking algorithm. I wrote it," Reed frowned. "What?" 10 years ago, Arya said, tears welling in her eyes. "I was working for a civilian contractor on the dunes. We were building weather control systems. I wrote a program to mask the atmospheric sensors during lightning storms, so they wouldn't trigger false alarms." She pointed at the screen. "Helios stole it. They repurposed it. This is my code, Reed. They used my algorithm to mask the heat signatures of the schools on Silver Dunes. They used my work to trick your targeting computers." She looked at her hands, her claws extending and retracting in agitation. "I helped them. I did not know, but I helped them. I helped kill my own brother." She looked at Reed, her eyes filled with a devastating shame. "I am just like them. I am a murderer too." She reached for the console to shut down the feed. I cannot do this. I have no right to speak for justice. I am the weapon. Reed grabbed her wrists. Stop, he ordered. Let me go, Arya cried. Don't you see we are both broken? We are both guilty. Yes, Reed shouted. We are. The blast doors groaned. The first cutting torch broke through spitting molten metal onto the floor. They used you, Arya, Reed said, forcing her to look at him. Just like they used me. They took your brilliance and turned it into a weapon. They took my loyalty and turned it into a crime. That is not guilt. That is the evidence. I cannot, Arya sobbed. If both of you are guilty. Mira's voice cut and small, but fierce. They looked down. Mira had stepped between them again. She took Reed's hand and Arya's hand. If both of you are guilty, Mira said, then both of you are also the ones brave enough to fix it. The bad man upstairs just presses buttons. You two actually do things. She squeezed her mother's hand. Fix it, Mama. Use the code to save us. Arya looked at her daughter. She looked at Reed. She saw the forgiveness in his eyes, a forgiveness born of shared scars. She took a deep breath. She wiped her tears. The code, Arya said, her voice steadying. I know the back door, because I left it there. She turned back to the console. I can crash the masking algorithm. If I crash it, the system will register the overload as a critical error and trigger the hard emergency shutdown. It will stop the bomb. Do it, Reed said. I cannot do it from here, Arya said. The interface is locked out by Cade. I need a manual reset at the core. Someone has to go into the reactor chamber and pull the breaker while I run the crash sequence. Reed looked at the reactor chamber door. It was radiating heat. That chamber is flooded with radiation, Reed said, and the thermal venting will cook anyone inside in 2 minutes. I will go, Arya said. I am faster. No, Reed pushed her back. You need to run the code, only you know the sequence. He picked up his pry bar. He looked at Mira. He knelt down and hugged her, a fierce, desperate hug. You keep your mom safe, Reed whispered. Reed, no, Arya said, grabbing his arm. You won't come back. Reed stood up. He looked at the blast doors where the security team was about to breach. He looked at the woman who had started as his enemy and become the only person who understood him. I have been running from the fire for 10 years, Arya, Reed said, a sad smile touching his lips. It is time I put it out. He turned and ran toward the reactor door. Guide me in, Reed shouted over the comms. He slammed the button. The heavy door to the reactor core hissed open. A wave of blistering heat rolled out. Reed Harlow stepped into the inferno. Inside the reactor core, the world was a blinding white noise of energy. The fusion drive was a towering pillar of blue fire in the center of the room. The heat was so intense, Reed's skin blistered instantly under his suit. Turn left, Arya's voice crackled in his ear, distorted by the radiation. The breaker panel is on the south wall behind the coolant pumps. Reed stumbled forward. His vision was blurring. The radiation alarm in his suit was screaming a flatline tone. I see it, Reed gasped. He reached the panel. It was fused shut by the heat. It is jammed, Reed yelled. Use the bar, Arya shouted. Reed, the detonation is in 60 seconds. Cade is trying to override my crash. Reed jammed the pry bar into the seam of the panel. He roared, putting every ounce of his old soldier's strength into the lever. His muscles tore. His skin burned. Snap! The panel flew off. Inside was the master breaker, a massive lever painted red. 30 seconds, Arya screamed. Pull it now! Reed reached in. The handle was red hot. He grabbed it. The smell of burning leather and flesh filled his helmet. He screamed in agony, but he pulled. Clunk. The lever slammed down. Simultaneously, in the data spine, Arya hit the final key. Executing crash. The fusion drive let out a groan that shook the entire station. The blue fire turned angry red, then pulsed white, and then it died. The hum of the overload faded. The emergency lights bathed the room in a soft, pulsing amber. "Sequence aborted," the computer announced. "Hard shutdown complete." Reed sank to his knees. The pain was absolute. He was burning up from the inside. "Reed," Arya's voice was panicked. "Reed, get out. The radiation levels are spiking." "I am coming," Reed wheezed. He tried to stand, but his legs failed him. He fell forward. The darkness crept in at the edges of his vision. He closed his eyes. He had done it. He had balanced the ledger. Then the door hissed open. He felt hands, strong clawed hands. "I told you." Arya's voice was fierce, right next to his ear. "We are a pack. We do not leave the pack." She had come in, into the radiation. She dragged him out. She hauled his heavy armored body across the threshold, back into the cool air of the data spine, just as the security doors finally burst open. But the security team did not fire. They stood there, weapons lowered. Behind them, a man in a dark uniform pushed through. It was not Cade. He was a captain of the United Terran Coalition Navy. "Stand down," the captain ordered the mercenaries. "By order of the High Admiral, this station is under Coalition jurisdiction." The broadcast. It worked. Reed lay on the floor, looking up at the ceiling. Arya was hovering over him, her face frantic. Mira was holding his hand, crying. "Did we win?" Reed whispered. Arya smiled through her tears. "Yes, you stubborn old human. We won." The aftermath was a blur of medical bays and legal depositions. Damian Cade tried to flee. He made it to his luxury shuttle, but the docking clamps refused to release. Arya had locked them down hard. When the Coalition investigators boarded, they found him shredding documents. It didn't matter. The broadcast logs were already mirrored on 1,000 servers across the galaxy. The investigation was swift and brutal. With the original Silver Dunes telemetry exposed, the narrative of the war collapsed. Helios stock plummeted to zero overnight. Cade was arrested and charged with crimes against sentient life. Reed Harlow spent 3 weeks in a regeneration tank. When he woke up, his skin was pink and new, though the scars ran too deep to fully erase. He was summoned to a hearing. Not a court-martial this time, but an reinstatement ceremony. The Admiral offered him his rank back. He offered him a pension, a medal, and a quiet posting on a garden world. Reed stood at the podium looking at the gathered brass. He looked at the gallery where Arya sat with Mira. Arya was wearing a proper engineer's jumpsuit, now her fur groomed and shining. Mira waved at him holding a new doll, this one made of soft, plush, not wire. "I appreciate the offer, Admiral," Reed said, "but I am retired." "Then what will you do, Sergeant?" the Admiral asked. Reed looked at Arya. "I have some maintenance work to catch up on, and I think I am going to try my hand at family life." 3 years later, Halcyon Spire was no longer a graveyard. It was a bustling hub of the Reconstruction Initiative. The lower ring had been converted into a hydroponic garden and school for refugees, both human and vulpine. In a comfortable quarters module near the upper promenade, Reed Harlow sat in an armchair, reading a physical book. He wore a civilian sweater, though he still kept his old combat boots near the door. "Papa!" Mira, now a lanky teenager with bright eyes and a mischievous grin, bounded into the room. "Mom says stop reading and come eat. She made the spicy stew." "Tell your mother I am a fragile old man and my stomach cannot handle her radioactive cooking," Reed grumbled, though he closed the book with a smile. "I heard that," Arya's voice drifted from the kitchenette. Reed stood up. He walked into the kitchen. Arya was there stirring a pot. She looked healthy, happy. The shadows were gone from her eyes. She turned and kissed him a quick, affectionate peck on the cheek. "The stew is not radioactive. It is spirited." "Like you," Reed said, wrapping an arm around her waist. Later that night, a thunderstorm raged on the planet below. The flashes of light illuminated the station windows. Mira woke up screaming. Reed and Arya were in her room in seconds. "It is okay," Reed said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "It is just the storm on Edris. The lightning cannot hurt you here." "I dreamt of the fire," Mira whispered. "The turret." "I know," Reed said. He rubbed her back. "But remember what happened." "You shielded me," Mira said softly. "And your mother saved me," Reed added. "And you saved both of us." Arya sat on the other side. "We are safe, little one. The monsters are gone." Reed looked at his family. The Fox engineer, the human soldier, and the girl who bound them together. They were not perfect. They carried the scars of a war that had tried to destroy them. But as he sat there in the dim light, listening to the storm far below, Reed realized something. HFY wasn't about the biggest gun or the toughest armor. It wasn't about conquering the galaxy. Humanity, true humanity, was the ability to look at the enemy across the fire and see a person. It was the courage to say, "I was wrong." It was the strength to use your body as a shield for someone who didn't look like you. "Go back to sleep," Reed whispered. "I am on watch." Mira closed her eyes. Arya leaned her head on Reed's shoulder. And for the first time in 100 years, the veteran closed his eyes, and he did not see ghosts. He only saw the future. The end.